What if I were to tell you that there's a good argument that George Bush should have not been president after the 2000 presidential election against Democratic nominee Al Gore? This was considered the most controversial election in modern American history. It came down to 546 votes. We're going to take a deep dive in this YouTube video and decide, did Americans decide the 2000 election, or was it decided for them?
Recount. They are saying recount.
There's no reason to think that this election was going to end any less bizarrely than it began.
We all know election night is big business for news channels. This is when their ratings skyrocket and everybody wants to be the first to make the breaking story or come out with controversial takes. So during this time in the year 2000, during the presidential election, multiple news outlets came out deciding that Al Gore was the winner. Eventually, they had to come back and retract their statement because they were saying that the numbers were not accurate and they weren't able to decide, and it was too close to come to a decision. This basically kept the American people and also the both parties involved, being George Bush and Al Gore, in limbo, waiting hours on hours for them to come up with a decision. And during this time down in Florida, it was big controversy.
According to Senator John
Mike, excuse me one second. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Mike, you know I wouldn't do this if it weren't big. Florida goes for Al Gore. Now, folks, the equation changes.
You guys thinking about the network projections at that point?
Well, I think the feeling from the beginning from our people who were crunching the numbers was that the networks were wrong.
Karen Hughes wasn't the only one unconvinced.
I don't believe that some of these states that they've called, like Florida, I just don't believe we got enough evidence to be able to call the state.
I remember saying to myself, well, I hope they're right with this. Basically, it was, listen, don't question the decision of the decision desk. Florida belongs to Gore.
But I think, Bill, and you're the maven on this one, that generally networks do not call unless they have a pretty high degree of assurance, correct?
That is correct. We have a pretty high degree of assurance that Florida and Pennsylvania have gone for Al Gore.
Then, 2 minutes later, all hell breaks loose.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
corrected.
And so did every other network, within minutes.
NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call column.
Bulletin, Florida pulled back into the undecided column. Computer and data problem.
We pulled it back until we can examine the data and see where we are.
This knockdown, drag-out battle drags on into the night, and turn the lights down, the party just got wilder.
We don't just have egg in our face, we've got omelet all over our suits.
The numbers start to go back and forth. We couldn't trust any of them. And I finally ran out of ways to explain to the audience what was going on.
So Al Gore was moments from conceding his run for president in front of the American people. He already had called George Bush and let him know that he was going to be giving his concession speech and to congratulate him. But before he could walk up to the podium, his advisors had stopped him to let him know that the race was still too close to call and that it was so close that he was able to demand a recount down in Florida. He was granted the recount, in which he chose 4 counties which were heavily Democratic, and also the main controversial county, which was Palm Beach. Palm Beach was heavily influenced by the elderly community and the Jewish population. The issue with the voting down in Palm Beach County was that they used butterfly ballots. Butterfly ballots were problematic for during this presidency because the way that the ballots were made, they like kind of opened up into pamphlets and you had the hole punch and they were kind of like offset from the name. So a lot of people who intended to vote for Al Gore ended up voting for Pat Buchanan, which caused a lot of problems because during exit polls, they would come out and say, oh, I voted for Al Gore, but actually they accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan. And also there was some Green Party member named Nard who was running. And I have a whole totally different issue with the Green Party, and we'll save that topic for another video. So it basically came down to 546 votes, and Gore decided to take his petition to the state Supreme Court down in Florida to get a statewide recount. But the Republicans were playing great political ball game, and they began to sabotage.
Bush wins. Florida goes Bush. The presidency is Bush. That's it.
The home state of Governor Jeb Bush is going to be a much happier Thanksgiving for the Bush family.
ABC News is now going to project that Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
It's after 3 in the morning on November 8th, 2000. The War Memorial in Nashville, Tennessee. Vice President Al Gore is inside, getting ready to publicly concede the presidential election to George W. Bush.
It was total chaos as we were trying to get into the War Memorial, pouring rain. The vice president and Lieberman's family and that whole group had gone in. The Secret Service, the police, everybody was on edge.
And I got on the phone with Bill Daly, and he said, "What's up, Mike?" And I said, "Billy, we haven't lost. This thing's going to be an automatic recanvass." I said, "This thing is too close to call."
I was just seeing my life kind of flash in front of me and kind of breaking out into a sweat thinking, oh my God, what do we do here?
That's when he contacted David Morehouse.
Everything was ringing at once and vibrating.
Told him, grab the vice president, get him in the holding room with Joe Lieberman. Do not let anyone go out. Just everybody freeze.
Michael Feldman was trying to get a hold of me. Feldman said, you need to stop the vice president from conceding.
He cannot go out on stage. You've got to bring him to hold.
The vice president's walking really fast, so it takes me a little bit to catch up with him. And I caught up with him. We were walking down a long hallway. End of the hallway is some stairs that lead to the outside where the stage is. I just stood in front of the stairs and said, "Mr. Vice President, we have to go to hold." And he said, "This better be good."
Finally, after 3 a.m., a second call to Bush from Gore, who was still hunkered down backstage at the War Memorial.
The phone rang again, and I heard Governor Bush in this very incredulous voice saying, "You're retracting your concession?" And, there's no precedent for anything like that.
So what you should know about the Florida State Supreme Court at this time is that it was heavily stacked with Democratic judges. Gore and Bush both sent down representatives to Florida to plead their case in front of the Supreme Court. But Gore's people were fighting an uphill battle because even though the court was stacked in their favor, you got to know that the governor at the time was his brother, Jeb Bush. And it was hard for Democrats to find a high-powered law firm to help litigate their case in front of the state Supreme Court because nobody would want to step on the governor's toes. Even though there's no evidence that shows that Jeb Bush influenced the election in any way, which I applaud him for that. He basically kept it neutral, even though he was the governor and the brother of the presidential nominee at the time. And also, George Bush's co-chairman at the time was Catherine Harris. Catherine Harris was in charge of the recounting down in Florida because she was the Republican state secretary, and she had to oversee the recanvassing of votes. Republicans knew that they didn't stand any chance in the state Supreme Court, so they decided to override the state Supreme Court and move straight up to the United States Supreme Court, which was heavily stacked with Republican judges at the time to get them to stop the recount.
Baker knew to win, he needed to get out of Florida's courts.
If we didn't find a way to get into the federal courts, we were dead meat.
Because the Florida Supreme Court was dominated by Democrats, Baker had to make his case to conservatives who wanted to leave it at the state level.
You want to be ideologically pure, or do you want to win? They said, we want to win. I said, well, then don't be criticizing our going to federal court, because if we stay with the Florida Supreme Court, we're going to lose.
Race would come down to a few hundred votes and the authority of one woman.
It's exciting to see the process working.
Destined for infamy. Katherine Harris was the Republican Florida Secretary of State in charge of the recount. And she was also the state campaign co-chair for George W. Bush.
What we asked her for was that she would be an honest broker.
And what was her response?
Oh, thank you.
Americans watched the partisans duke it out daily on live TV. Behind the scenes, Mac was plotting the Republican path to victory.
I called the senior staff together and I said, we're not going to break any laws, but I want you to forget about the intent of the laws. We're going to bring this election in for a landing. And we were going to fight them tooth and nail, house to house, hand to hand, and we were going to hold Florida unless they sent in federal troops.
When the clock ran out on November 26th, Secretary of State Katherine Harris grandly announced the results.
We needed the nation to see that as far as we were concerned, it was over. George Bush had won, move on. And so it was important that there be some drama.
And there was plenty of drama.
In accordance with the laws of the state of Florida, I hereby declare Governor George W. Bush the winner of Florida's 25 electoral votes for the President of the United States.
Good evening.
The margin, 537 votes.
Secretary Cheney and I are honored and humbled to have won the state of Florida, which gives us the needed electoral votes to win the election.
If you made it this far, ensure that you like, comment, and subscribe. So me personally, I enjoy hard knocks politics like this. I like the whole strategic planning and trying to out campaign your competitor. So what do you think? Do you feel George Bush legitimately won the 2000 presidential election? Or do you think that Al Gore would have won if they would have kept counting the votes down in Florida? Leave a comment below letting me know how you feel, and thank you for coming out. Peace.